Canada's new trade deal with the U.S. and Mexico has been under intense scrutiny since Sunday night when negotiators reached an agreement just under the wire. Concessions were made, the most obvious adversely affect Canada's dairy farmers. But Canada also may have given up something else, a chance of a free trade deal with the world's second largest economy. Clause 32 includes something called non-market country free trade agreements. 3 countries fall in that category: Vietnam, North Korea, and China. The clause says that if Canada were to start talks towards a free trade agreement with China, it needs to notify the U.S. and Mexico at least 3 months prior, and Canada must provide as much information as possible regarding the objectives, and if they do reach a deal, Canada will provide the U.S. and Mexico with the full text of the agreement no later than 30 days before the date of signature. Finally, if the U.S. or Mexico doesn't like what it sees, they can terminate the USMCA within 6 months. So how unusual is the clause, and how much power does it really give the U.S.? The CBC's Katie Simpson has been digging into those questions for us, and she joins us now. Hey, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. So how unusual is it? What are the concerns?
One expert I spoke with today who at one time was advising Prime Minister Justin Trudeau described this move as extraordinary, saying that this clearly is a concession that Canada was prepared to make to the United States because, of course, Donald Trump has made China his biggest trade target. It is no secret he does not like the way that China does trade. And today his top advisors were out speaking to the media saying that this new agreement, the USMCA, is also, in addition to keeping trade going through North America, it's also meant to send a signal to China to start behaving itself. I spoke with Roland Paris, who at one time was advising Prime Minister Trudeau on foreign affairs, and he's the one who says this move is extraordinary.
I think that it is troubling to provide another country with a formal role in vetting Canadian trade negotiations. I think that the United States is sending a message by adding this to the new NAFTA. The message to Canada is watch out, and the message to China, I think, is keep your hands off North America.
Now, he doesn't necessarily think that this is going to have a big adverse effect on Canadian businesses at this time, but he says it's more about the principle. Why is the United States going to be given this, and Mexico as well for that matter, given the power to have some sort of influence on Canada's future trading relationships?
And what about the government? What are they saying about this right now?
The Prime Minister didn't seem to be fazed by questions about this. Obviously, during yesterday's news conference, it came up as well. And Chrystia Freeland tried to say, well, if anyone wants to terminate the trade agreement before, they didn't have to have a reason. But now this is one reason why they could provide it. That sort of explanation is not going over very well with some stakeholders we've been talking to for a story that we're going to do on the National tonight. But here's what the Prime Minister had to say when asked about developing relationships with China today.
Obviously, China is a significant, growing player on global trade, and we, as always, will look for ways to engage, deepen, and improve our trading relationship with them in ways that are beneficial both to Canadians and to everyone.
Canada had wanted to launch formal free trade talks with China late last year. Justin Trudeau headed to Beijing, and they were aiming to have some sort of formal launch of free trade negotiations. However, there were miscommunications between what the Canadian government thought was going to happen, what the Chinese government thought was going to happen. And because of those miscommunications, they weren't able to launch those free trade talks as had been expected. And so Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came home unexpectedly empty-handed on that trip. So that was a concern, since the objective was to do more trade and to start this process with China. Overall, this is something the Trudeau government has tried to do. They want to expand trading partners, find new markets. China is one of those markets, so this will certainly cast a new tone over how this process goes.
All right, thanks a lot, Katie. CBC's Katie Simpson. So why is this clause in the USMCA, and does it mean a free trade deal with China is now off the table? Joining me now is the Minister of Trade Diversification, Jim Carr. Minister Carr, pleasure to have you back. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Does this effectively give the U.S. a veto over a free trade deal with China for Canada?
We talk to the Chinese all the time. We'll continue to talk to the Chinese. We have all kinds of aspirations for a closer relationship. As a matter of fact, it's interesting, the two stories that you led with off the top, because we're talking today about a $40 billion investment from the consortium that is going to make Canada a very important player in the international LNG market. Much of that product ultimately will end up in Asia. We will be replacing coal with what will one day be the cleanest LNG in the world. This is a very good news story, and that will be a part of our trading relationships with the Asia Pacific. And no one is telling us that we can't make deals. We are making deals, and it will be the benefit of Canada.
Are they saying, though, that you can make those deals, but if you want to make a formal deal, a formal free trade agreement deal with China, that's a no?
No, there are notifications there, but you have to remember, Vassy, that in the current NAFTA agreement and in its successor, any of the parties to the agreement can give 6 months' notice for whatever reason they want to get out of the deal. That's to protect.
So why put this clause in there?
That's to protect us against developments that may not be in Canada's interests. So that clause is there. It was there before. Nothing that has happened over the last couple of days will impinge on Canadian sovereignty.
There was no real indication, though, from the federal government that this was even a consideration leading up until Sunday.
This is a complex deal that's been negotiated over a period of 14 months, and you never know until the very end what finally will be in the deal. Because what happens between the time you start talking and the time you stop talking is that bottom lines begin to emerge. And they did emerge, and we were satisfied that the deal was good for Canada. And by the way, opinions that range from Jerry Diaz to Brian Mulroney, and a lot of people in between yesterday and today, have said that this is a good deal for Canada. And you have to look at the deal in its entirety to conclude whether or not it's in the national interest.
But that doesn't preclude you, I think, from examining some of the clauses that were
No, of
not
course,
made
and people
public
are.
in the lead up.
No, and people will examine clauses for many months to come.
And this one was brought to the public's attention not only vis-a-vis the release of the text, but today we have Larry Kudlow, an economic advisor to the president, saying, honestly, I think it sends a signal to China that we are acting as one, and I think that's very good. Is that what the federal government here wanted?
People send signals, they send messages, and others receive those messages. The point that I want to make is that Canada has given up no sovereignty. Canada will continue to do business with those countries with whom we have relationships. It's not only this North American agreement we're talking about. We just celebrated the first anniversary of CETA with the European Union. We have introduced legislation that's moving quickly through Parliament, the CPTPP. We're having conversations with Mercosur countries in South America. We're talking to the Pacific Alliance. We'll continue to do that. In spite of the relationship that we have developed and this new agreement that we think is good for the country, we're looking beyond the hemisphere. We're looking to the Asia Pacific and to Europe and to South America, and we'll continue to do that because an expansion of our markets is good for Canada because trade produces wealth, and that ends up very important to the people who elect me or don't elect me, depending on how well they think I'm doing, in Winnipeg South Centre, and that is to create jobs for Canadians.
Is the federal government still pursuing a formal free trade agreement or the big talks that will lead to one with China?
The federal government continues to have talks with China, not only talks with China, but also there are business deals with China that are happening all the time.
I understand that, but I'm trying to parse apart because this clause relates to an FTA, not just developing a bigger trade relationship with China. The government was at one point interested in starting those talks. As Katie mentioned, the trip happened, the beginning of those talks were not announced. Is that still being pursued?
We continue to do important business with China. We want to deepen our economic relationships with China. They are a large and important market for Canada. They have the capacity to help us create more jobs in our country, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to create more of those jobs.
With respect, that doesn't answer the question about whether there's anything formal being pursued.
There's nothing formal right now.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you. Let me switch to NAFTA then and ask you.
Sure.
Why didn't the government hold out for exemptions under the 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel before signing the deal?
Well, you have to compare the agreement to the positions that were announced by the American administration 14 months ago. Compare where we are now to where we started, and the progress has been enormous. At the beginning of the discussions, the American administration wanted to dismantle supply management. There was
I don't think they ever said they wanted to totally.
Well,
supply management.
that certainly was the implication, and that was the position that many people believed to be their opening one. And you can follow it all the way through the various points of agreement that we announced over the last number of days. You look at the agreement that was made on autos, it's very significant. Canada sends 2 million automobiles to the United States now, tariff-free up to 2.6 million.
You got exemptions on 232 for autos, but not for steel and aluminum.
Still talking about that. Everything was not determined. This is a continuing conversation. We think where we landed yesterday is good for Canada, and we're very encouraged by other people who are giving comments across the country today from various sectors of the economy, from the workers to the entrepreneurs to the associations to premiers. And we think that we found a place where Canadians are comfortable.
The steelworkers called it a sellout. I know there are. I'll give you that there are a lot of people commending it, but the steelworkers are worried about their future.
Well, you can zero in on one comment, and I can zero in on another. The point is that the negotiators, and we have the finest negotiators in the world, determined at the end of the negotiation that these items were best for Canada. And I think that we will see that we have maintained important access for our most important trading partner. My own province of Manitoba, $8.9 billion of exports a year. 71% of exports out of Manitoba go to the United States. And we think that while we solidify that hemispheric relationship, as we expand our export markets, the result will be good for Canada, and that means more good jobs for Canadians.
When will farmers find out how and when they're getting compensated?
We're having a continuing conversation. The Prime Minister has said, Minister Freeland has said, I say now that farmers who are impacted will be fully compensated.
When?
I'm sure the talks are going on right now.
Is there any kind of, I mean, and I am getting a lot of questions from, and I'm being honest, from dairy farmers who are concerned that they were not given a timeline with TPP, the new CPTPP. Is this happening in the next 6 months, in the next 3 months?
The government is determined to be fair to the producers, and will make good on that fair promise.
So no timeline.
We'll make good on that fair promise.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Minister Carr. Great to see you again.
Okay.